Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, the Dodgers swept the weekend series with the Cubs. We're going to talk about the pitching performances, Mookie Betts. We're going to talk about the nature of the long baseball season and how sometimes you just have boring, good team wins and how that's kind of awesome. And we're going to talk about the Dodgers' approach to this 31 games in 30 days stretch as far as the starting pitching goes. So let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Dodger fans. This is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now, and that way you will never miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time watching or listening, my name is Jeff Snider. My co-host over there is Vince Samperio. And Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans, just like you are. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room, so we're not quite insiders, which is probably a good thing. But we bring you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And with that out of the way, let's talk some Dodgers. Vince, we went into this series knowing the Dodgers should sweep the Cubs because the Dodgers are a better team than the Cubs. But as we know in baseball, that doesn't always happen. You could almost say it hardly ever happens. Usually the best you can hope for is to win a series, and sweeps are kind of the exception. But this weekend, we got the sweep we were hoping for.
Got the sweep, didn't lose the second game of a 3-game series for the first time, I believe. And yeah, it was fun. You know, we had ended up having 2 off days because Friday's game got postponed. Ended up getting 2 on Saturday, won both of those, one Sunday. And what we'll get into later is just kind of like the workman-like job the Dodgers did this weekend. But anytime you can sweep, and especially the Cubs, even though they're not as good as they used to be, it's always a good time in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. Wrigley Field is a classic stadium, and the weather was very Chicago-like. For the second year in a row, the first game of a series got rained out, and they had to do a doubleheader. And for the second year in a row, they pitched Clayton Kershaw in the first game of the doubleheader. And let's just say the 2022 version went quite a bit better than the 2021 version.
Yeah, Kershaw's historically struggled at Wrigley Field, historically struggled against the Cubs. But as we've seen from Clayton Kershaw so far in 2022, he's been getting through everything, and nothing has quite fazed him so far. So good to see that. Good to see Mookie Betts had a big weekend, had a big Saturday in the second game. And now Mookie's riding. He got a hit on Sunday, right? So riding a 9-game hit streak. Riding a 9-game hit streak. Moving on up in terms of batting average, OPS, everything else. A guy that we've talked about started pretty slow. I think first 11 games, and if you do the split between the first 11 games and then the games after that, it's a complete turnaround. And it's good to see, and we see that now. I mean, Freddie Freeman's had hits here and there sporadically, but he hasn't quite seemingly dominated like we kind of saw earlier in the season. Trey Turner's in a little bit of a slump, somewhat. He's not quite there yet. Justin Turner, Max Muncy's still trying to find their way at the plate. But as we've seen with this Dodger lineup, all you need is a couple guys to get going or one inning to get going, and these guys are able to put those innings together. They weren't always by hits, but they were able to put those runs up, and we're going to talk about the starting pitching too. I mean, the starting pitching just been dominant. I think I saw a stat, 15 straight games by Dodgers starting pitching allowing 2 runs or less. And you're going to win a lot of games that way if your starting pitching is not giving up runs, and then your bullpen's not giving up runs.
Yeah, and it's not like they've been 4-inning starts either. They other than Tyler Anderson, they've been going pretty deep. But yeah, on the offensive side, Saturday was kind of a microcosm of what this Dodger team can do. Through 8 innings, they only had 1 hit, but they were up 4-2. And it was because they worked walks. They got 4 walks to get a run in, and then Mookie Betts cleared the bases with a 3-run double. and that was their only hit of the game. But when your only hit of the game is a 3-run double to that point, hey, that's pretty good. And the Dodgers walked 9 times in that game, ended up with 3 hits, including a 2-run homer from Mookie Betts too. I think I saw that during Mookie Betts' 9-game hitting streak, 5 of them have been multi-hit games, including both Saturday and Sunday. It was, the offense. We didn't even mention Chris Taylor. He struck out, I think, in 18 of his last 33 plate appearances have been strikeouts, and I mean he is scuffling bad right now. But the team, as a whole, is still. I mean, the Dodgers scored 20 runs this weekend without really much fanfare. It was like the most boring 20-run outburst that we've seen. And by the way, they only allowed 3 runs, and that's kind of the most ridiculous part. And realistically, at least one of those runs should have been called unearned. That very charitable triple call on the ball that popped out of Mookie Betts' glove. I mean, it was this Dodger pitching coming into the season. We talked about it as a question mark, and Dodger question marks are different than a lot of teams. The question mark was never who's going to do it or is it going to be good? It's going to be, okay, how are they going to be good? We didn't know for sure. And I don't think any of us expected quite what we've seen so far. But, Kershaw and Buehler both have ERAs under 2. And, Tyler Anderson is – and Andrew Heaney's ERA is 0 and in his 2 starts, and he's hurt now. And Tyler Anderson stepped in and said, well, I can do that too. If Andrew Heaney can do it, Tyler Anderson can do it. And it's just it's remarkable. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was a different kind of question mark. The Dodgers had it's pretty funny to, question a starting rotation with Walker Buehler and Julio Diaz and Clayton Kershaw, but it was a matter more so of, what Kershaw is going to show. Kershaw's still been effective, but can he be healthy? Obviously, he's been healthy so far, so that's the easy part of it. Julio was, not really a question mark. Buehler wasn't really a question mark. First couple times through, Buehler was the question mark. Now Buehler's riding 3 starts, last 3 starts, 1 run allowed. I mean, he's just been thoroughly, and not even in the same way. I mean, he threw his cutter, I think 38 times on Sunday, his career high for throwing that pitch. He's I like the way he's starting to use that pitch, and I think it was one of those ways I kind of envisioned him using it. You saw the Cubs early on in the game swinging early in the count, similar to how teams used to try to ambush Kershaw, swinging early in the count because he's going to try to get ahead with the fastball. Now Buehler has that fastball, but can throw that cutter for a strike, and it just has enough of a differentiation from his fastball in order to get, some swinging strikes on strike 1 when guys are trying to come after him. So, these guys are working. We've seen Julio got through a couple performances where he didn't have all his stuff, and he saw his stuff kind of diminished early on, kind of figured it out. Kershaw's working in a changeup occasionally, has a little bit more difference between a slider and fastball in terms of velocity. And then Tyler Anderson is just a guy who, we haven't seen too much, but is doing his job. I mean, he's giving them not that much length, so pretty much 5 innings every time out, but 5 innings of no runs, 1 run is more than what you need from a number 5 starter. And then, Andrew Heaney, who you mentioned, hadn't allowed a run due to started throwing progression. So hopefully he's back soon. And then the Dodgers go from question mark at starting rotation to an embarrassment of riches again.
Yeah, absolutely. Overall, the Dodgers have a 2.07 ERA, which is by far the best in baseball. The gap between the Dodgers and the number 2 Yankees is bigger than the gap between the Yankees and the number 10 Chicago White Sox. The Dodgers starting pitching, sorry, I had this pulled up and then it reset on me. Dodgers starting pitching is the best in baseball with the 1.83 ERA, 38 points better than the Diamondbacks of all people. And then the Dodgers relievers ERA is second best in baseball, 2.42, just barely behind the Yankees. So the Dodgers have the best starting pitching and nearly the best relief pitching, and overall just a dominant team effort. And then that all-star lineup.
Yeah, I mean, and even noted on the relief pitching, that's without much innings from Blake Trinan, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, and really not that many innings from Craig Kimbrell, because the Dodgers are either comfortably ahead in most of these games, or the times he does pitch is either in a safe situation, or sometimes a couple times they've just had to get him work because they had won or lost a few games and didn't need him. So they're doing that with a bullpen of guys who aren't Blake Treinen and Craig Kimball.
Yep. We're going to come back in a minute. We're going to talk about the nature of a weekend series like this where baseball maybe isn't the most exciting and why that's such a wonderful thing. So thanks for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting, stats, and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's baseball playoffs, Major League Baseball, and, of course, horse racing. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends at action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we are back. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. When you're done with this episode, you might want to check out the Locked On Now podcast. There's recaps of MLB games with analysis from our local experts, taking fans through the season like no other network. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Vince. So, one of the things that it's kind of a running theme for us on this podcast over the years is just kind of the nature of baseball. And I felt like this weekend series with the Cubs kind of made that point that one of the great things about baseball, and they say it all the time, if you have a bad day, there's always tomorrow, because as a baseball team, you do play nearly every day. And, we're going to talk in our last segment later on this episode about how for the next month, the Dodgers are literally going to play every day. And, but usually it's 5 or 6 games a week, and that's great. And one of the things that is awesome about that this weekend kind of underscored is that you don't need every game to be a barn burner. You don't need all that excitement all the time. One of the beautiful things about baseball, like I mentioned this on our Locked On Now thing, if you listen to that podcast, you'll hear me talking about, like, on Mother's Day, I didn't want an exciting game. I was hanging out with my family and, spoiling my wife, making dinner for my wife. And it's like, I had the game on and I was watching it, but I don't need pressure on Mother's Day. I wanted a nice, easy win, and that's what the Dodgers did. And it was, they were down 1-0, and then suddenly they're up 2-1 without really even a big hit. It was a sac fly, and I don't even remember how the second run scored, but it wasn't a huge deal. And then later they scored a run on a double play that Trey Turner hit into, and a wild pitch, and just no huge innings, nothing major, no home runs hit, just kind of you blink and, oh yeah, they're up again. Yeah, oh, they're going to win this game easily again. And that's kind of what I was looking for on Sunday,
Yeah, and it's we talked about this a lot in the 2020 season about how the 2017 season, you remember the comebacks and the things, and 2018 is always the kind of anomaly of the recent times with it was just a weird season. But 2019, you remember all the walk-offs, 3-in-1 weekend, everything else. And then 2020, you don't really remember too much for the regular season. I know obviously it was a short season. That's partially why, but the Dodgers just, kind of dominated and didn't really, have a need for the dramatics, not until the postseason, which maybe they were saving it all for the postseason because, coming back down from 3-1 and then LCS. But this is how this weekend felt. I mean, the Dodgers were only down, I think, on the last game on Sunday, but for the most part, they had the lead. They weren't really allowing runs, and every game, I think the longest game was Saturday night at just over 3 hours, 3 hours, 5 minutes. I mean, to go sweep the weekend, every game 3 hours or less, basically, and to never really feel uncomfortable about the win, late in the game, for the most part, once it got past the 6th inning, the Dodgers were in the lead and it didn't seem like they were going to give it up. That's all you can really ask for. And yeah, I mean, obviously it's not as fun as walking off or scoring. There was 3 walkouts, I think, on Mother's Day alone on Sunday. It's not as fun as, hitting 5 home runs in a game or whatever the case is. But the Dodgers are beating the teams they're supposed to beat right now. They got a bunch of games coming up against teams they're supposed to beat. They're going to have, 31 in 30 days, with 2 of those days having 2 games each because of the last rain out. So it's one of those things where this stretch might be like that. You're playing a bunch of bad teams, and if you're supposed to beat them, and if they treat them like they did the Cubs this weekend, it might not be the most fun 30 days, but it's going to be a 30 days that leaves you with at least 24, 25 wins.
Yeah, hopefully. And yeah, I was thinking about just the fact that they swept a doubleheader on Saturday. It's hard to sweep a doubleheader. Like, I was annoyed when they got rained out because it's hard to win 2 games in one day, even when you're better than the other team. There were 2 other doubleheaders on Saturday, and both of them were splits, even though both both doubleheaders were a mismatch, not quite as big a mismatch as Dodgers Cubs, but one team was definitely better than the other in both of those doubleheaders, and yet they split them. The Reds are worse than everybody. The Reds won a game in a doubleheader, and if the Reds can win a game, you'd think the Cubs could. Well, no, not against the Dodgers. They're just going to take care of it. And I love exciting games too. And I have very fond memories of 2019, those walk-offs and all that. Those are great. But sometimes a nice boring game, I wouldn't want those every time. But one of my favorite things about baseball is it is relaxing. You can go to a baseball game. The games that you and I have been to together. Even though we were talking the other day about when I'm at a game, I'm here to watch the game. Well, yeah, but we're also talking, and we're chit-chatting the whole time. And, you can hear each other talk, even when the stadium gets loud, it's like, okay, well, yeah, let's focus on this. So there's a big moment right here. Reliever has 2 strikes on the guy. Okay. Shut up, Vince. I'm going to watch the game for a second. But there's also a lot of time that you can just sit and chat. And I love that about baseball. And at every level on Monday, I think it was Monday, maybe. Yeah, no, Wednesday. Anyway, the day doesn't matter, but I just spent several seconds figuring out that it was on Wednesday. My son had a game, and I texted an old friend of mine who, the father of one of my buddies growing up, his wife just recently died, and my son's game was down near where he lives. So I texted him. I said, "Hey, my son's got a game. If you want to come watch the game with me?" He came over, and we just talked. And I cared a lot about the game. My son was playing in the game, but I talked to this guy who I've known since I was 6 years old, and we talked about old times, talked about going on Boy Scout campouts together when I was a kid, and just kind of caught up. And it was like, yeah, that's one of the things and this is totally cheesy, and I recognize that, but whatever movie it is, it says, how can you not be romantic about baseball? For me, that's where the romance is. It's like, I've talked before about the bond between families. When I think about that 18 inning game in the 2018 World Series, I think about the fact that I was there with my dad and my 2 sons. We had and my uncle, the Giants fan. We had generations together there. And that's what I remember about that game. And, so many games, big moments and stuff. I remember the people I was with as much as I remember the moment. Chris Taylor's walk-off home run in the wild card game is the only game I've ever been to with my cousin Jake, who hosts a UCLA podcast, Jake Merrifield. He and I went to that game together. Only game I've ever been to with him. And I remember that. It's like baseball is awesome. And even though this weekend, I was just watching on TV, but it kind of reinforced that one of those things that I love about baseball.
And like you mentioned on Sunday, I mean, Mother's Day, it's still Mother's Day while we're recording this, by the way. So happy Mother's Day if there's any mothers out there listening. But yeah,
even if your mother happens to be a Padres fan.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, it was good that the Dodgers won like that. They got their runs, maybe not in the most dramatic way, but either way they're winning and you can kind of enjoy and everything else. And I think that's what comes with baseball in general is just, we do get worked up, every game by game, especially as people that do watch almost every single game or at least, pay attention every single game. But it's still a great day when you can watch Dodger baseball. And, if they happen to lose tomorrow, we're still going to be here to talk about it. And we're still going to watch the game. And we're still going to look forward to the next game. And, I think it is a lot easier, though, being a Dodger fan, obviously, because let's just say, sorry for the Reds, but, if the Dodgers were 3-22 at one point, I don't know if it would feel exactly the same as it does right now. Obviously, as long as we've been doing our podcast, the Dodgers have been good. For pretty much the last 10 years now, the Dodgers have been good and playoff, or if not World Series, and at least playoff contenders. And I think that helps a lot. But, like I said, the Dodgers are going to have weekends like this, and the Dodgers are going to have weekends where they're frustrating, and the Dodgers are going to have weekends where they walk off 3 in a row, and it's always going to be fun because we're watching baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope we're all appreciating this. And just kind of my standard refrain is, one of the beauties about baseball is the 6-month season. One of the great things about being a Dodger fan is they give us a team that makes us happy for at least 6 months a year. And, October can be stressful, and, every year except one is so far in the time that we've been doing this podcast and longer, it's ended in disappointment and heartbreak. But that one year it didn't. And every year we've gotten those 6 months, and there's memories that we have from those years that, you can't take away. They don't become meaningless just if they don't win the World Series. There's plenty of things that were wonderful about last year, even though last year ended frustratingly and sadly. You know what? Beating the Giants in the division series was awesome, even though it didn't lead to a World Series win. Some of those games, the game that you and I were at together when the Dodgers won on a walk-off homer by Will Smith against the Giants, that doesn't go away just because the Dodgers ended up losing the division by 1 game to the Giants. We got that moment, and that's one of the great things that the Dodgers give us is at least 6 months of happiness every year.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to come back in a minute. There's a little bit of news about the Dodgers pitching staff that will kind of lead into a conversation about how the Dodgers are going to handle this 31 games in 30 days stretch from a pitching standpoint. So thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. And please continue to keep it Locked On Dodgers. I want to talk to you about Built Bar. Summer is coming, and you often need a snack. Like I said, I'm always down at the baseball field watching my sons play, or on the run with. I've got 3 kids who all have their different activities. Sometimes you need a snack you can just throw in a purse or a backpack or a pocket even. And Built Bar is great for that because they are portable and delicious. And did I mention they're healthy? By the way, they're super healthy. It's like a candy bar that you don't have to feel guilty about. Every Built Bar is covered in chocolate, is low calorie, low sugar, low carb, high protein, high fiber. There's also the Built Puffs that are like chocolate covered marshmallows that are also very high in protein, very good for you. Whatever you like, if you know what flavor you like, just order it. If you don't, then order a mix box. They'll send you a bunch of different flavors so you can find out what you like. But whatever you order, go to built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and you will get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, we are back. One last segment. We're going to talk a little bit about some news on the pitching front. The Dave Roberts mentioned today on Sunday before the game that Blake Trinan, they had originally said earlier in the weekend that he was going to go get an MRI. I kind of got the impression on Sunday that they've scrapped the MRI, and he's going to rehab it. But Dave Roberts did refer to the stretch run as Blake Trinan when they're hoping to get contributions from him. That's a couple months away. And Victor Gonzalez, the best news that Dave Roberts had about Victor Gonzalez is they don't think he's out for the season, or they're not ready to say yet that he's out for the season. And so both of those guys are currently on the 10-day IL, but both of them seem very possible candidates to be on the 60-day IL if they get to the point where they need a 40-man roster spot. Just to kind of, if you're not totally sure how the roster rules work, the 10-day IL counts against your 40-man roster. Your 40-man roster is your 26 active players plus 14 more players who basically are eligible to be called up to the big leagues. That's your 40-man roster. Guys on the 10-day IL count towards that 40-man roster, but guys on the 60-day IL do not. They're removed from the 40-man roster, and so you often will see guys, teams never put a guy on the 60-day IL immediately, even if he's having Tommy John surgery, so he's out for a year. They'll put him on the 10-day IL until they need that roster spot. And so that's the way it's been. And the Dodgers have already transferred some of their guys, Dustin May, Jimmy Nelson, they're on the Danny Duffy, they're all on the 60-day IL right now. But Trinan and Victor are both on the 10-day, but could be moved. Right now, the Dodgers 40-man roster sits at 39 players, and that's because the COVID IL also does not count towards the 40-man roster. And David Price and Mitch White are both on the COVID IL right now. So they're not counting towards the 40-man, but they will need to be put back on the 40-man when they do come back, which could be soon for both of them. And the reason that we're bringing this up is because Dave Roberts said on Sunday that the Dodgers will be going with a spot starter on Wednesday against the Pirates. And the possibilities are Robbie Erlin, who we saw pitch the 9th inning on Sunday, Andre Jackson, and Ryan Pepiot, the Dodgers' number 2 pitching prospect, former guest on this very podcast, and a guy who is not currently on the 40-man roster, so they would need to make room for him if it was him. So all of that is a long precursor to talk about. Vince, what do you think they're going to do on Wednesday? What do you think they should do? And what do we think they're going to do over the next month or so when they've got how many times do we think they're going to use these spot starters?
Yeah. And, I think right off the bat, I think Erlin was mentioned, I think, mainly because he came up. He was supposed to start for OKC, but then when they brought him up to be the extra guy for the doubleheader, I think that was the main reason he came up, and also because they didn't need to add him to the 40-man at the time because they have Price and Mitch White on the COVID IL. Justin Brule was optioned before the game to keep Erlin on the active roster right now, which is why I think we could see Pepio on Wednesday, because they do kind of have that floating spot right now where they don't need to add him to the 40-man. Andre Jackson's already on the 40-man. He's already been up one time this year. I would think he would be the guy normally, but because they do have this, kind of, I guess, an advantage. They said Mitch White isn't quite ready yet, and David Price is gonna. Basically, they're kind of putting Price on ice a little bit in order to maybe, like I said, get this spot start in. So I wouldn't mind seeing Pepio because of that. You don't have to do the full commitment to the 40-man roster, but you're able to see what Pepio can do. He's been doing really good so far down there in AAA. And yeah, I think it's a matter of maybe he gets this one, Andre Jackson gets the next one. It's 31 games in 30 days. There's a doubleheader in there, another doubleheader there in like 10 days or so. And I think, realistically, I think they want to keep, I think they mentioned it either during Sunday's game or maybe one of Saturday's games, how the Dodgers have only had about 4 or 5 starts from starters this year on 4 days rest. Everything else has been 5 days rest or more. I think they want to keep that as a trend. We've already seen them pull guys a little bit earlier, mostly Julio, which we talked about last week, of starts, especially if the Dodgers are winning or if they see something. So I think it's a matter of, in those 30 days, I wouldn't put it past them. We're for sure going to see 2 spot starts. I wouldn't put it past them seeing 3.
Yeah, and with Pepio, even though there's plenty of room on the 40-man for him right now, like putting him on the 40-man, he's now on your 40-man roster, and you can't get Ryan Pepio off the 40-man roster because some guys you can sneak them, you can DFA them, they'll clear waivers, send back. Ryan Pepio will not clear waivers. Ryan Pepio, once he's on your 40-man roster, he is on the roster forever. And that's a big commitment, especially when you've got Justin Turner, who's not hitting. So are they going to need Jake Lamb? You've got Chris Taylor, who is striking out 98% of the time these days. Are they going to need Kevin Pillar? Both of those guys aren't on the 40-man right now. You do have guys coming back who are currently on the 60-day. Dustin May and Danny Duffy, they're expecting both of them back this season. Both of them are on the 60 days, so they'll need 40-man spots for those guys. And so, Robbie Erlin, I think he's a guy who they probably DFA. Once they're done with him, they'll DFA him. Either he'll get claimed by somebody or he'll clear waivers and they'll outright him back to Oklahoma City, get him off the 40-man. So there is a little bit of wiggle room there, but we've talked a few times about how, their 40-man roster is full of guys who aren't ready for the big leagues. And also you don't want to DFA. And it goes back to wishing we had that crystal ball so they would have known they didn't have the Rule 5 draft, because I think that really would have changed the look of this roster. I think it would be a no-brainer to have Ryan Pepio make a start in the next month if they had a little bit more 40-man flexibility. Even with that, I still think he's probably likely to, because he's going to debut sometime this year anyway. So he's going to be on their 40-man roster starting at some point this season. And it's not that big a deal to have it be right now, because like I said, the guys they're going to need spots for, Dustin May and Danny Duffy, both of those guys are further down the line anyway. Blake Trinan and Victor Gonzalez, if they do put them on the 60-day IL, their returns are further down the line when they probably would have been thinking about calling up Pepio anyway. So you can kind of kick that down the road and just, say, all right, I'm going to let future me worry about that problem. And I'd love to see Pepio. He's been lighting it up in AAA this year. He's been awesome. He didn't look great in the Major League spring training this year, but he's been working. He's added that sweeping slider that so many people are using to go with. He's already got a amazing changeup and a good fastball. He's added this slider, and it has really worked for him so far. I'd love to see that at the big league level. We really enjoyed talking with him. He's a really nice guy, cool dude, and so you hope for the best for those guys. So, yeah, I think I'm hoping it's Pepio on Wednesday, because that's exciting. And even though I just spent a whole segment talking about how boring baseball is awesome sometimes, guess what? Exciting baseball is awesome sometimes too. I still remember when Clayton Kershaw got called up for the first time and how excited I was. And Pepio might not be Kershaw level, but I'm still pretty excited for whenever it happens.
Yeah, and I think that's the part with Pepio is that we know we're going to see him at some point this year. Is a more exciting pick, and it's no knock on Andre Jackson. Andre Jackson's been solid for the Dodgers in the minors. He came up last year and showed that he has the stuff to be able to compete in the majors and maybe even be successful for the most part in the majors. And he's a guy already on the 40-man roster, so that it's one of those where that makes more sense. But Ryan Pepio is, a little bit shinier, the shinier thing that we want to see. And, realistically, if you're going to need 2 to 3 spot starts in the next month and possibly a couple more spot starts the rest of the way, you might as well throw Pepio into the fire, see what you got, because, you're going to need to know at some point. And with Andrew Heaney probably still at least another month or so away, they are realistically going to need that arm that can either give them length every 6 days or once a month, or even a guy that can just provide that length at the end of the bullpen if he ends up staying on the active roster. If they don't want to option him too many times up and down, since after May I think it goes back to 5 for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think the 5 actually kicked in on May 1st. So,
okay, so yeah, we're already there.
Yep. So there are limits on that. Yeah. So hopefully we'll see Pepio. I think that's what we decided. Hey,
Yeah.
Dave, if you're listening, let's go with Pepio. Okay. You got anything else for today, Vince?
No, I think that's it. It was, like I said, fun weekend. We got East Coast. Looking forward to the 9:30 a.m. game on Wednesday, but obviously there's 2 games before that. But just hope the Dodgers continue to take care of business against teams they should beat. Continue to do that, and yeah, that's it.
Yep. Series starts in Pittsburgh today, and then they'll come back home starting on Thursday, I believe. So that's going to do it for us today. Thank you all for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. We really appreciate it. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, where Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully, brings you his unique perspective on the major leagues past and present. It is free and available wherever you get podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at Vince Samperio. I am on Twitter at Snydog, and the DMs are open in all of those places. You can also email us anytime you want. The email address is lockedondodgers@gmail.com. I always almost say my personal email address there. I never have yet, but someday I might. But, it is my Twitter handle and at gmail.com. So, if you want to email me, sure. But lockedondodgers@gmail.com is our podcast email address. You can also leave us a voicemail or shoot us a text message. That number is 323-863-LOCK-5625. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us. When you get in your car or sit on your couch, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Have a good one.